and welcome back to the channel. Today we are finally starting the rigging part, and just like my beginner series, we are starting with the eyes because I feel like rigging the eyes really helps you learn like the basics of Live2D. So that's where we're starting. I also like to start with the eyes because I like to start with like the smaller detailed things on the face and then expand out and start doing angles and the body and everything. Mainly because everything is meshed already all nicely and you don't have to go back and edit it whenever you you rig your angles. I'm going to be using a lot more tools and different things you can use for your eyes. So everything I showed today, you don't have to do for your eyes, okay? It's mostly just for you guys to learn new techniques and see what you can do with your eyes and also the rest of your model. We'll be talking about glue and blend shapes, a little bit of physics, and of course, all the basics of rigging, basically, hopefully. There might be also some miscellaneous parameters here and there. But there's also technically the second rigging video. In the first video, I show you guys how to set up your model and everything in Live2D. So if you haven't seen that yet and you want to follow this tutorial like very closely, there might be some missing links. So you might want to check that out. And also, here is my new updated eye separation. I also updated the files in the coffee if you guys would like to re-download this. But you can see here, I just made my eyes a little more bolder and I separated them a little more differently. I tried to make it easier for most people to be able to follow and also added some extra masking layers. Some of them you can't see here, but you'll see later in the video. And I just cleaned up the art a little bit because the art was kind of nasty last time. You might notice I have a lot of stuff happening on my iris, on my pupils and stuff. I don't know why I added so many extra layers. I just felt like it, but you don't have to do that, okay? I have a lot of extra bits here just because I can never decide how I want my eyes to look like. But yeah, with those out of the way, let's get to Live2D. Alright, so here we are in Live2D. I just opened up my file, the one we used in the last video. And first, before I do anything, I'm going to import the new eye layers. So I'm going to go up to File here, hit Open, and I'm going to grab my new PSD with the new eye layers. And then when this pops up, I'm going to pick my current model here, Chipuko V3, so they can import the files into directly this model file. And I'm going to replace my PSD, my original PSD. So that's going to replace all of the files that are named the same, but obviously my eyes look weird. That's because all the extra new layers I have are not in the right place. So I'm just going to take everything that's new and stick them where they need to be. So using the part tab here and hiding all of my warps and whatnot, I'm going to find my eyes and paste them into that folder and then move things around until they're in the right order. Alright, so I rearranged the layers to be in the right order on my part section. I also edited some layers that needed to be additive. I just changed the blend mode here. And I also clipped everything on my iris and whatnot onto my eye whites so they don't spill out of my eye whites. Now on the left here, you're going to see that they're going to come in on these rotation deformers. This is mostly for you to move them around to make sure they're in the right place. But I'm going to hold down Ctrl and click on both of these deformers to select them and delete them. Then I'm going to click on some parts of my eye here to find where my original eye pieces are in my deformer tab, and I'm going to select all the pieces that need to be in here and shove them in there. So now when I grab that entire warp deformer for my left eye here, I take everything, and then when I grab my right eye, I take everything. Alright, I tweaked it a little bit, but now I am ready. First, let's pick an eye to rig first. I'm going to do my left eye this time. I usually do the right eye first, but why not do the left one? And on my part section here, I'm going to click the eyeball next to my front hair folder so I can hide the front hair and see the eyes better. Now, before we actually do any rigging, I'm going to organize a few things with my warps and parameters. I'm going to click on a random art mesh here, and on the left here you can see this is everything on my left eye, and all the little shinies in my eye and everything on my eye is like super separated. So I'm actually going to select my little pupil thing here, my pupil shine, hold down shift and select everything in like my iris, eye color stuff, and I'm gonna put it in a warp. I'm just gonna call this iris. Honestly, the most eye anatomy you're gonna get out of me is like iris, pupil, and shinies. That's about it. But I can close up that warp, and now I have a lot less here to worry about. I'm also going to put all of my lashes in a warp folder just because I want to. Now I'm going to open up my parameters. In here on my eyes, we have IL open, IL smile, IR open, IR smile, and then eyeball X and Y. You can rig the smiles individually like it's already separated here, but I'm actually going to just rig them on one parameter. So I'm going to stick my IL smile into MISC. my misc folder, and I'm going to right click on IR smile, edit the parameter, and I'm just going to name this eye smile and just hit OK. I'm also going to rename my IL and IR open to be easier for me. When we're looking at the model, the left side here is the right side of the model, and the right side of the model is the left side of the model. So when you're looking at it, you see the left side, just translate it to the opposite, and that being the right, and that will be for IR. But sometimes it gets confusing, so I'm going to name my parameters. I'm going to edit the IL open, and I'm going to turn this into I arrow pointing right open, and I'm going to change IR open into I arrow pointing left open, just to make it easier for me. If you guys like your R's and L's, it's all good. I prefer the arrows because I'm going to get confused all the time. And then I'm also going to edit both of the eye opens to change their ranges. So an eye open is at 0, that's when the eye is closed. When it's at 1, that's when your eye is at default, neutral, should be like just how you drew it. And then maximum, I'm going to change to 2. And this will be when we widen our eyes, just for, you know, a little bit more expressiveness. I'm going to hit OK. And do the same thing to the other one. Now our dots here are going to be in the middle because our default is at 1. Hopefully, if you're watching this advanced eye rigging tutorial, you should already be familiar with the super basics, but just in case. Now let's get into meshing the eye. All these layers here are, of course, our art mesh. And on each layer, you'll notice that they all have these little dots here, the white dots with the black outline, and then like gray lines connecting them. That is the current mesh of these objects. So I'm going to start with the top lash here, which is like the main, you know, lash here that's going to go up and down. If you hit auto here, which is the automatic mesh generator, you can hit a preset like this to give it an automatic mesh, and this will put a lot more dots all over this little line here. And of course there is deformation little, which will give it less dots and like bigger shapes here, and deformation heavy will put a lot more dots and make these shapes really tight. The more you rig, the more you'll understand how like these meshes sort of work and how you'll like your own meshes. But I'm going to show you how to manually mesh these. So if you go to the manual mesh edit right next to the auto one, so it will solo out the layer that you selected. You can also pick multiple layers to solo out and mesh at the same time, but we'll go over that very soon. First, we are going to delete all of the little mesh vertice points that our auto mesh gave us. So if you go over to your tool details panel, wherever you put it, find the eraser icon, and then you can erase it all. Now, if you hit OK, there's going to be no mesh on your art, and therefore it will disappear if you hit the check button. But you know, if you ever do that, just hit Ctrl Z to undo what you just did. So I think in my first tutorial, I kind of showed using this plus pen tool to manually make all your points here. We are going to use this pen tool instead with like this DNA looking icon thing. And this is the stroke mesh mapping tool. It's kind of like a mesh pen. Well, like these are mesh pens, but this is like a fancier mesh pen. So if you click and hold on one end of your eyelash and click and drag to draw a line straight through the middle of your lash, and then let go at the end, it will make this line with extra vertices. Now you're going to want to go down to your tool details here and find under repeated density, there's going to be this drop down menu here, and you're going to turn this to 3, and that'll make it so that there's one line going straight through the middle and then 2 parallel lines on either side of that one. You'll also see all these little green dots everywhere. You can move them around, and if you click on the green line through the middle, you can add another point there to kind of perfect the curvature of your mesh line. So after I get that right through the middle looking all nice and smooth, you can play around with the mesh width and the repeated density. If you increase the mesh width, it's going to make the 2 lines on either side of the middle line expand out. So you're going to want to make sure it expands over all of the art to make sure the art is inside all of these lines. If you increase repeated density, it is going to kind of make the shapes in between all these points bigger and also give it less points, of course. So whenever you're rigging things that move a lot, sort of like eyes and mouths, you're going to want to make sure there's more points. So we're going to decrease the density. How many points is up to you, of course. I would try not to overdo it if it's for something that you don't need too many mesh points for. Of course, that's something you're just going to get used to the more you play around with LIVE2D, but you should have something sort of like this. Now you can click this little button here that says confirm stroke being edited, or hit Shift E to kind of, you know, confirm your mesh doing here. And then we're gonna go to the pointer tool on tool details and actually move around the points here, because as you can see, it's nice and even throughout, but you know, at our ends it goes a little skinnier. So I'm just gonna push in these points here to match how my art looks. You can also leave it as it was, but I just like to do this. So once that is done, we're gonna hit the check button here on mesh edit, and now we have our new mesh on our top lash. So I'm gonna grab my bottom lash here, go to manual mesh editing, delete these points here, and kind of just do the same thing. So for my bottom lash, I'm not contorting it too much. I want it to generally keep its same shape, so my mesh is a little more simple. I also had to move this out because I have my eyelashes attached to it, but since it doesn't move too much, I don't need to worry about adding too much mesh or making it look correct, honestly. So I'm gonna hit OK. All right, and after that, I just auto meshed everything else on my eye, so you can go ahead and do that. But now that we have the whole eye meshed, we're gonna do something a little fancy. My eye whites are not meshed because we are gonna glue the top lash here and our bottom lash to our eye whites. Now, if you don't know anything about glue, this is like a nice intro to glue. If you know what glue does, it should be pretty self-explanatory. Basically, when we have our top lash go down, our eye whites are going to follow it. So it's just a little bit easier in the rigging process. Of course, it depends on the type of eye you have and how it moves. It might not be the best solution for you, but you know, maybe doing this will help you use glue for other parts of your model you might need it for. So right now, my top lash is meshed pretty appropriately, I would say. Our bottom lash though, we only have it around the art, but we are actually going to bring it kind of around the bottom part of the eye whites. So we can glue the bottoms of the eye whites to our bottom lash. So I'm going to go back into our bottom lash here, erase all of these bits. And then taking this tool again, I'm going to kind of trace the eye white edge here and kind of morph everything to look correct. Alright, then I'm gonna hit OK. Now on my warps here, I'm gonna select my bottom lash, hit down Ctrl, click on my top lash, and grab my eye whites here. So I have these 3 layers selected, and I'm going to hit the manual mesh option, and it's gonna show up all of those meshes, different colors for, you know, the corresponding art. If you click off to the side, not on any of them, it's gonna deselect all of them. And if you click on top of them, it will select it. And then if you click on an empty space again, it'll show up a little drop down menu, and you can pick which one you want to look at from there. So I'm gonna click and drag to make this box here that selects all these points. You know they're selected because it turns the white box to red. And I'm gonna hit delete on my keyboard. Now I'm going to select my bottom lash. And taking the lasso tool, I'm actually gonna try to select all the little dots right down the middle like this. And once I have like the middle line here selected, I'm gonna hit Ctrl C to copy it. There's one little dot here that I didn't manage to grab, but I'll just put it in manually later. And then I'm gonna go to my eye whites and hit Ctrl V to paste that line there. And then making sure I deselected all of the points, I'm going to zoom in here, grab the pen with the plus button, click on this one point here to select it, put a middle dot right on top of the one. You can kind of faintly see the mesh of the bottom lash here. I'm going to put that there, and then attach that to the other end here to finish that off. Going back to my selection tool, I'm going to go to my top lash here and select the middle points as well. Hit Ctrl C, go to the eye whites, and Ctrl V, and then click off of that to deselect. I'm gonna shave off some of these points here that I don't really need, and taking the plus pen tool again, I'm going to connect those vertices. Taking my selection tool, I'm gonna click on this point over here to add another line there. And once you close off this mesh, it's gonna add all these blue lines. You can hit auto connect to automatically add the red line to those blue lines. If you hit OK with the blue lines won't actually be like actual mesh. It's just kind of there to show you that you can auto connect it. But for the eye whites, I'm actually not going to connect it. But once I have it all rounded out, I am going to expand out the bottom line a bit just so I have some whites for my eyelash whites down here. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now I'm going to select my eye whites, hit down Ctrl, and select my top lash. And then I'm going to hit manual mesh there. Now you'll see that the top line of my eye whites matches up with the middle line of the top lash. I'm going to select all of those points that match up like this. This time you want to make sure that you have all of those selected. And I'm going to hit Ctrl G, and that is going to glue all all of those pieces together. So usually you want to copy paste the mesh so they kind of line up perfectly. You don't have to do any fiddling with it, and that you have enough points for each object, because you need 1 point for each 1 point on, you know, each mesh. But now that's glued together, I'm gonna hit OK, and then I'm gonna grab my bottom lash and my eye whites and do the same thing here. Now, the reason why we can't glue the whites to both of the lashes if when we have all 3 selected is that you can only have 2 selected for the ones you want to glue together. So just keep that in mind. But now when you click on your eye whites, all of the points it has should be glued together. And when we hit OK, you're going to see that the eye whites, you know, have 2 glues to them. So if I grab my top lash and move this around, you'll see that the eye whites kind of go with it and the top lash also goes with it. Same for the bottom lash. But you know, the thing is, we want the whites of the eyes to move, but we don't want the lashes to move, or like not like mesh and blend together like that. Now to fix that, we're gonna change the weight of the glue. So right now we have the top lash selected, and you know, the top lash only has 1 glue to the eye whites. So if you click on the little glue tag here, it's gonna go to this page where you now have the glue tool in your hand. Again, if you don't know, you can hold down B and click and drag to make it bigger or smaller, and you're gonna see colors on the mesh. Now these colors show you kind of like which one has the most strength. It'll make sense later, but you'll have new tool details here. We have this red and green glue, this red glue, and this green glue, and this yellow glue. Now, if you click on the green glue, you'll see that it focuses on the top lash mesh. If you click on the red glue, it focuses on the whites mesh. And you'll see that there's a little bit of green on the whites mesh and a little bit of red in the green mesh. It kind of makes it more like yellowish. And we want to keep our top lash looking exactly the same when we move it up and down, and not be affected by the eye whites at all. So we're gonna make more things green, if that makes sense. So with the green glue selected, I'm going to click and drag just over and over again, click and drag to make sure it is all saturated with green. I am left clicking, by the way. So now if we take our arrow tool here at the top and grab our top lash and move it up and down, you'll see that our top lash stays exactly the same now. However, we want our whites of the eyes to stay attached to the glue up here. So we're gonna go back into the eye whites here and go into the red and green glue tab. Now, if you left click and drag, it's gonna turn red at the eyes here. I'm gonna hit Ctrl Z to undo that. If you hold down Shift and click and drag, it'll become green. So we're gonna put green all over just the top of the eye whites. If we switch to the red glue tab here, you'll see that there's more of like this darkerish green here. So just make sure that's nice and saturated on the top there with green. Now if we go back to our arrow tool here, grab our top lash and move that up and down, you'll see that the whites completely stay connected to our top lash. It doesn't change our top lash. Now we're gonna do the same thing for the bottom lashes. We're gonna go into that glue tab here. Our lashes here are green. Side note, your glues may be different from mine. For both my lashes, they are green, but one of yours might be red. Just make sure that you're copying the same way, just different colors. So if my bottom lash here was red, I would make this all red. And going back to our red and green glue weights here, I'm gonna hold down Shift and make it all green down here. If my bottom lash was red, I probably wouldn't have to press Shift. Just make sure if your glue is not giving you the right color that you want, just hold down Shift and it'll switch it to the other one. And then I'm gonna go back to my arrow tool, put my top lash up. That works. Put my bottom lash down. That works. And then hypothetically, if we close this down, our eyes would be closed and you don't see any whites. I mean, obviously you see some here because it's not morphed, but you get the gist of what I mean. I will note, if you're going for this type of style, you might have to change your mesh after a bit. For example, for me, when I pull my bottom lid down, you're gonna see that there's some whites like spilling outside of this line. I'm gonna go back into my manual mesh editor, just selecting my bottom lash to move the center points kind of like in between of the line of like where I want to keep it. I'm gonna hit OK. And now when I move it down, it's a lot cleaner. All right, now we're finally gonna get to rigging the eye, which should hopefully be maybe the easier part. I am just gonna be teaching different ways to warp the eye, and hopefully you guys can take each technique and use whichever ones you can for all the pieces of your eye. And now you'll probably notice that there is this red box around everything that appears when you select things. This red box is called the bounding box. And if you watched my last video on how to set up your model in Live2D, you should hopefully have a keybind to hide this red box. Mine is Ctrl H or like Control hide kind of. And if I do Control H again, it reappears. I also have a keybind on just straight up H that hides all the mesh and everything. If you want to learn how to make those keybinds, you can check my last video, or I'll also throw up the instructions here if you can understand them. But with those basic things out of the way, let's get to rigging the eye. So I'm going to start with my top lash here. And before you move anything, you're going to want to put keyforms on your parameters here. So I'm on this eye, which is on the left side of the face while I'm looking at it. So I'm going to use my eye, arrow pointing left, open parameter. I am going to these 3 green buttons here that'll add 3 keyforms on my parameter when I select it. And since we are going to do eyes closed first, we are going to set our little dot here to the far left keyform. Now make sure you're on the right keyform, just right click on it and it'll automatically snap to that keyform. But if you left click and drag, you'll see on the side here, it tells you kind of what number keyform you're on. And just as a reminder, at 1, this is our neutral look. Our eyes are open. So usually what you just drew here will be your neutral look at 1. At 0 is when our eyes are going to close. So whenever we have this selected, everything we rig on this will be how we want the eyes to look when they're closed. So even if you have a different type of style of model or anything, as long as you can warp your eyes to look closed in your style at 0, gonna be perfectly fine, hopefully. Also keep note of which art mesh layer here that you have this keyform on. For example, if we click on my side lash here, these green dots are now going to be grayed out. That's because there's no keyforms on my side lash arts for this specific parameter, but these black holes here means that there are keyforms on this parameter on a different layer. And of course, ones with no green or black dots are ones that have no keyforms on them at any layer whatsoever. So going to our top lash, we are going to use the same technique I used in my first eye rigging tutorial, which is using path deformers. So I'm going to select the path deformer tool here, and I'm going to click on either ends of my top lash here, the little points. If you click on the line here, you can put a dot right in the middle. I'm going to put this on the middle part of my top lash. And again, I'm going to then click and drag to add more dots to the center of those dots. For most like usual anime eye shapes for the top lash, I will use 5 points. Most of the time, really depends on the shape of your eye and how you want to move and warp and everything. But I'm going to put 5 points here. Now, usually you can go to the pointer tool here, and if you click on a green dot, it will become red. That means you have it selected. If you click and drag that dot, it will move the mesh in this line here. Ctrl Z to undo that. But if you have the path deformer tool selected, you can also just hold down Ctrl, which will show up the bounding box. You can hide that. And holding down Ctrl, you can also just warp it from there on the path deformer tool. This is handy if like you need to constantly be adding dots or switching things around to move it around, so you don't have to go click back and forth between each tool. But I'm going to go to my pointer tool. I'm going to show my bounding box. And the first steps I like to do for my eye closing look is to hold down Shift, which is going to let us move our art mesh on the X or Y axis in a straight line. And I'm going to move it about 3/4 down the eye whites. And after that, I'm going to hide the bounding box and click and drag on these green dots of my path deformer until I make a nice little closed eye look. Now, the reason why I don't bring this top lash down all the way to my bottom lid is that it doesn't look too static for when my eyes close and like my bottom lid is just staying still. You know, I want my bottom lid and my top lid to move together, but making sure that I had that rigged on my eye closed keyform. If you click and drag your red dot here, it will morph into what it is at our neutral position when we change it to 1 here. So this is 0, eyes closed, 1, eyes open. And then of course, since we have the eye whites glued to our top lid, there's no eye whites here. And remember, if your eyes are closing, but you still see your pupil here, even though your whites have moved. I got so many comments about this on my eye rigging tutorial, but this is because my pupils are clipped to my eye whites, okay? So if my eye whites are not there anymore where my pupils are, they're not going to be seen because they're clipped on the eye whites and the eye whites are gone. I will say, as a little note, if you have your eyes clipped to your eye whites, sometimes there will be this weird line here, like a white line for when you clip stuff. I'm not going to show in this tutorial, but you can also do an inverted clipping method mask on your eye whites. And if you're a little bit knowledgeable about that, you should be able to make out how you would use inverse clipping on eye whites for the pupils and everything. Just a little note. If that doesn't make any sense to you, don't worry about it. But now I'm gonna take our bottom lash here. I'm gonna show a different type of technique. I'm actually gonna put a warp deformer on my bottom lash. I'm gonna name this eye open. Name this whatever you like. I usually like to name it the name of the parameter I'm using on it. I'm gonna hit create. Make sure you put keyforms on that. I'm gonna set this to 0 at eye closed. Now, since we're warping on an actual warp deformer, it's gonna be a little different. For the top lash, we were warping directly on the mesh. In most instances, I would not warp directly on the mesh unless it's something small or something really detailed in the way it warps, such as eye parts like this. For me, usually I keep touching the actual mesh for when I need to do certain looks at angles and whatnot, and for eye stuff. But now that we have an actual warp for our bottom lid here, you can do the same thing and hold down shift and click and drag to move it around. But it is curved, of course. There's a handful of things you can do with warp deformers. I'll show a couple of them. And you know, usually I would not put a warp deformer on eye parts like this, but it might come in handy if you have a more complex rig or if you want certain eye parts to move together under one warp deformer. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can rig certain things. So I just want to show you guys different ways to do it. Of course, you can just rig the bottom lash as we did the top lash if you don't want to go through all this. So I'm going to show you the deform brush tool, which is right next to the path deformer up here. You'll notice instantly that this tool has a bunch of circles around it. You can hold down B and click and drag to make it bigger and smaller, of course. I'm going to make it about this big. You can change the weight and the brush size here as well. And there's going to be 2 circles. There's one in the middle, which if you increase the brush stiffness, that'll increase the middle circle. And weight for this brush is just how much this brush will affect certain things. For example, if we have it at 100%, it's going to be moving it quite a bit. If we had the weight at, say, 0%, it's going to barely move it. You can't tell, but I am clicking and dragging. If I put it at 12%, you'll see that it moves a lot less. So it's just kind of the strength of the brush. It's sort of like whatever is in the circle or near the circle is gonna relatively keep its shape. For example, if I click and drag on my middle lashes here, they basically keep their shape as I'm moving them. But if I put them on the edge of the second circle, they are gonna be warped a lot differently. So with my keyforms here set and my brush ready to use, I'm just gonna paint my shape of the bottom lid for my eyes closed, which is pretty easy. Look at that. And all our eye whites are mostly under the top lid. And if we click and drag our parameter here, you can see our eyes opening and closing. Now, doing it with the brush will kind of warp things around weirdly. As you can tell, when this closes and opens, the art here kind of, you know, melts a bit in a way, I guess. Usually you can remedy this by going to your bezier edit type here and going to smooth all. If you click on these green divisions here and drag them a tiny bit, they will attempt to smooth out like these gray dots here. You can also move them manually yourself. If you look at the boxes while your eyes are warping, you can see how like each point kind of warps each section off. So see, we have our straight regular rectangles here. As they move, they're getting smushed. They're going at a different angle and everything. So sometimes if you're warping something and you see something's really off, you can tell by looking at the boxes and say maybe like this point here is like overlapping over a ton of things and it's making something here look weird. You can also use the green points here to kind of warp things around. You can add more green points by increasing the bezier division numbers by width or height. I'd recommend not putting too many as it may lag your LIVE2D if you put too many on one art mesh. If you want to be more precise with how you're editing these little bits, you can also increase the conversion divisions right here. Again, also try not to put too many, and it's going to let you more accurately edit your little bits there. So now it's looking a little bit more natural, just a little bit. I also like to use the brush tool to kind of make my art look less janky at times. For example, if I press H to hide the mesh of my top lash, you can see that it's curved, but it looks a little awkward at some places. I'm just going to take the edge of my brush here, move it out, bring certain things up and certain things down. And now that looks a little better. So next, I'm going to show you another thing to do with warp deformers. I'm going to put one on my top lashes here. I'm just going to call it eye open again. I'm going to add keyforms to that. Move this to my closed eye position. Now for my closed eye, I like my lashes downturned. And then when I do my eyes smiling, I like to put them upturned. Mostly to show the difference between when I'm smiling and when I'm not smiling. So that there's a little bit more expressiveness with the like gap in expressions. So my favorite way is I just take the bounding box top here, like, and drag it down, and that'll flip it over. I find like a look I like. eye. And then we're going to use temporary path deformers. I have mine to a keybind, but if you don't have yours to a keybind, you can keybind it, or you can go to modeling, temporary deform tool, and then go to temporary path deformation. Now you're going to want to make sure you are on your eye close or whatever parameter you want to be rigging on right now. And then just hit that. And it's like the path deformer tool, you can put down your dots here. Since we are putting a path deformer on a warp, usually I will put a little bit of my path deformer outside the box just to sort of encompass everything. Sometimes if you put your temporary path deformers in not the right places, like it won't get all the boxes correctly and it'll warp weird. One thing for the temporary path deformers, if you click and drag it without holding control, it will actually move the art mesh. If you hit down control and click and drag it, it will move the dot itself. So I'm just gonna move everything into position, follow the shape of my closed eye a little. If you go to your open eye look, you'll notice that your path deformer here is transparent. You have to make sure that you click on your temporary path deformer tool when you're on the keyform you want to deform on, or else if you click and drag this right now, it'll actually just go back to 0. But we can sort of see how it moves here. If I hit down my H to hide everything, we can sort of see how it looks, and then you can tweak it to your liking. I'm actually gonna close out of my path deformer and use my brush tool to move certain things. Sometimes I like to put another keyform right in between the eye open and eye closed if the eyelashes look a little weird. If you open up this box with 3 dots in it, you can see all your keyforms you have on this parameter. I'm going to add one right in between 0 and 1 for 0.5. Make sure I have that selected, and then you can actually move these. You might not see it very well, but I have these little lines, and those are my lashes. I'm going to try to make it follow like the bottom of my top. Yeah, that looks. You can also do a thing where if I wanted these flatter lashes right here, I'm gonna hold down Ctrl Shift C, and that's gonna copy exactly how these lashes look. So if I go to my 0.5 and I hit Ctrl Shift V to paste that, it's going to give me that exact look here. I'm gonna click and drag that down like the middle of my lashes. Move this part down a little bit. So now if we take a look at that, a little bit better of a transition down. Of course, you can always tweak each keyform, see how things will look a little better. Again, you don't need to use warps on all of your eyepieces. I would use warps if you were wanting to change out the textures really easily. Like I said, especially for toggles, like if you had different pupils, like for example, I have like my little star sparkle pupil shape here. If I wanted different pupil shapes like a heart or like an X, I would want to rig my pupil star here on a warp. I can just put the hearts and the X's in the same warp so they all move the same way. But you know, for your lashes and everything, if you're not going to be switching them out for toggles or anything, I'd recommend just touching the actual art mesh. But you know, I'm just showing you guys different techniques for different things right now, so just a heads up. So I'm gonna rig the rest of my eye really quick using the first technique where I just touch the mesh with path deformers. So give me a second there. Alright, I have most of my eye rigged. As you can see, everything closes. But I'm gonna show you some little extra bits I put to my eye that maybe will inspire you to, I don't know, some extra stuff into your model. But as you can see here, I have this little dot called my lash clip. I'm just gonna quickly give that a... yeah. Now, why do I have this little lash clip here? So this lash clip here is actually for my top lash. I'm gonna take the ID of my top lash and put it as the clipping ID for my lash clip. Now you're gonna see that's gonna give this weird line. Clipping is gonna do that a lot, honestly. That's why in some models you'll see people doing inverted masking. I'm just gonna do this to show you what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to run along my top lash here, obviously, but it's to blend in my side lash and my top lash for when my eyes are open. Because when you see my eyes are closed, I don't have my clip down here. You're actually going to see the full line of the bottom of my top lash. So if I hide my eyelashes here, you'll see that I have a line at the bottom, which looks really scraggly right now, but we'll ignore that. So honestly, we can just unclip this from my top lash, and we can instead clip it onto the side lash. So it's clipped onto the side lash, but it's still above my top lash, as you can see on my parts list here. If I put the lash clip under my top lash, my parts list, you're gonna see the line of my top lid. I'm putting the lash clip over my top lash, flipped onto my side lash, so that when my eyes close, my side lashes are moving down, so you only see the clipping layer when the eyes are fully open. Now obviously, you can still see some of the line here when it's half closed. So I'm gonna put 3 keyforms on my lash clip here. I'm gonna put one here at 0.5, I'm actually going to take this down here and warp it a bit. And then I'm going to Control Shift Copy to copy the position of this entire art mesh. And then Control Shift V, paste it. So it's going to stay at the same location. Just so that obviously right now it is following side lashes while the eyes are closing. It's going to stay there when the eyes are fully closing so that I can get the bottom of my lash. Obviously, I can make this a lot more seamless if I put it at a different keyform over here. But, you know, just for example. And obviously, as you see it moving, you're going to see it kind of bunch in sometimes. You can look at the actual mesh to see how it moves. See what you need to fix in between like keyforms. So I have this going down a lot and kind of shifting over side a lot. So in cases like this, you might want to add more keyframes for certain parameters just to make it a little more seamless. So I'm going to do that really quick. I'm going to delete this 0.5 actually. Go into here and put you here. And then just edit those, okay? Just edit those. Alright, so now I have it moving a lot more seamlessly. You can see here, there's no weird clipping. And then over here at 0.3, I actually have it at 0 opacity. And then 0 opacity for 0. Just to make it like blend in while it's closing, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to show you. I'm going to finally fix this. It might have been bothering you the entire tutorial. But my bottom lash here, you can see the skin under my eyelashes here. And usually I want my eye whites there actually. So I actually have another clipping layer. If I turn that on, I have these little points here that are green. I'm going to give them a quick warp. And I'm going to use an inverted clipping mask for these green bits and my bottom lid here. So what that's going to do is everywhere I have these 3 points, the bottom lid art is not going to show up. So what I'm going to do is take my bottom lid clip, the green stuff. I'm going to copy the idea of that, paste it to my bottom lid. And obviously if you hit enter, your bottom lid's going to only appear where the green bits are. But I'm going to invert the mask and now you'll see the bottom lid. But obviously we still see the bottom lid clipping the green. So we're going to turn that opacity to 0. And now we're going to see none of the bottom lid where the lashes are. I'm actually going to deform this a little more. So a reason why I do this is in the past, I just kind of cut out my bottom lid here so I would have these spikes gone from my bottom lid. But when my bottom lid moves so much, these points might not be where I want them to be when my eyes are closed, so it might look a little weird. So I just kind of remedy that by using inverted clipping masks with the green points I just showed you. So I'm gonna put some keyforms on these green points and put one at 0.5 because as you can see, as we go down, our clipping layer is not moving, so it's gonna make everything look a little weird. I'm gonna move these up till they look fine and normal. You'll still see some skin peeking through. That's because of my eye whites here. They're actually not going down all the way, so I'll need to fix that. And then if we go to 0 here, really need to fix these. I'm just using my brush tool to shove everything around, honestly. And there we go. I'm gonna fix my eye whites really quick. Okay, now it looks a little better. I just tweaked a lot of things around, but look at that. So those are just some clipping examples I wanted to throw in for anyone that has like really unique curve eyes. You can always make it work, I promise. Usually, most of the time. All right, now that we have the eye closed, fully working, we are now gonna do eye widen. So by now, you should kind of know, what you're doing a little bit, hopefully. I'll do one example, and then hopefully you guys can figure out the rest for yourselves for eye widen. So starting with my top lash, obviously we already have 3 keyforms here. 0, as we know, is when our eyes are closed. 1 is when our eyes are open at neutral. And 2 is going to be what our eyes look like when we widen our eyes. For, a little shock value. So usually I like to grab multiple layers at once and kind of just warp them all into my eye widen. So for example, I grabbed everything that we already rigged on. As you can see, I kind of just manually grabbed them from the side, but you can also right click on a keyform and then you can go to this drop down menu here and hit select, and that will actually select everything that has keyforms on that specific parameter. So since my bottom lash and my top lash are actually under a warp that already has the eye open keyforms on them, I'm gonna deselect my bottom lash and my top lash by holding down Control and left clicking on them. Usually I would just grab all the top things first and move them and then grab all the bottom things at first, but as an example, I have everything here. I'm using H to hide all the warps and all the meshes, and using the deform brush, I am widening the eyes. So that is definitely one way you can do it if you're, a little lazy. Honestly, it doesn't look that bad, I guess, but my top lid here is actually not meshed, so it did not move at all. We're just gonna fix that. Alright, I also touched up some of the lashes and everything since I used the brush tool. It kind of squishes certain points. I just made everything look a little nicer. But yeah, if you just want to grab everything at once and use the brush tool to deform them like that, easy peasy. I would maybe recommend just rigging each piece one by one, depending on how your eye looks or how fast you want to go or how lazy you are. But for now, I think my top and bottom parts of my eye look fine. But next, we are going to do an eye widen on all of our pupil iris stuff, everything that's the color of our eye. If you've seen like screenshots or clips of VTubers when they widen their eyes and then like their irises get really small for that shock factor, that's what we're gonna do. So I actually have all of my iris, pupil, blah, blah, blah stuff right now in this warp deformer. I'm actually gonna select everything in here to add another warp deformer for eye open. Same thing here, I'm gonna put 3 keyforms. And now that we're on number 2, our eyes widen, I'm going to take the corner of the red bounding box. I'm going to hold down Alt, which lets us resize this mesh from the center. This is what it looks like when we use Alt versus not using Alt. And we're also going to hold down Shift, which actually keeps the ratio of all the sides of this mesh. I'm going to do it like tad bit, or is that a good bit? I'm not sure. And then let's test it. Obviously, how you want your eyes widen look is up to you, but I think I'm satisfied with that one. Then I'm gonna hold down Shift and drag it down a tiny bit just to be a little more center of my eye. But yeah, that is what my shocked look is gonna look like. And then I'm just gonna do a little bit of touch-ups here and there. Alright, I'm pretty satisfied with my eyes widened. Of course, you can make yours look however you like. You can make your pupils bigger or smaller, or your sparkles smaller or bigger, whichever you prefer. But now that we have our eye open all nice and rigged up from 0 to 1 to 2, now there's a handful of ways to do eye smile. Sometimes I will do it exactly like how I did it in my first eye tutorial video. Sometimes I'll use just blend shapes. Sometimes I'll use a mix of the two, but I always like to start with my eyes closed. So I'm gonna go into my top lash here and add 2 keyforms to eye smile, and then I'm gonna turn eye smile to 1. So now whatever I rig on eye open 0 and eye smile 1 is what my closed eyes are gonna look like when I smile. So for example, I want my smile to be a little curvier, look a little more expressive and happy. If I go back to eye smile 0, I can see my neutral look and then to my smile look. And that's basically what you're gonna do for the rest of the eye, just like in my original tutorial. If this is your first time rigging, you might get a little confused with having 2 different keyforms on 2 different parameters. So if you're completely new, I would reference my beginner tutorial series. But I'm basically gonna go through and edit each part the same way I did for this one, just adding a regular keyform here. If you want to do blend shapes, you can turn this into a blend shape before you start keyforming it. Or if you want to do a mix, you can duplicate eye smile and make the second one a blend shape if you know your blend shapes well enough. But I will go ahead and edit every little thing for my eye smile. Alright, I am done with my eye smile. This is what it looks like when my eye is closed. How it looks when it opens. I'm squinting a little. You know how like your eyes look when they smile? And then these are my eyes smiling when they're open. It's a little harder, but you know, we make it work. And then I also added in a blend shape for my eye smile. So I have this parameter here for my regular eye smile, and then my blend shape here. I put this on anything that doesn't need to be like specifically tweaked, just like generally tweaked, if that makes sense. For example, everything on my blend shape eye smile is on my pupil, and it just makes it bigger and everything looks shinier. Of course, it's up to you how you want your smiles. Of course, it's up to you how you want your eyes to look when you're smiling. It really varies depending on your model and your art style, so totally up to you. I also don't know if this is gonna look that good when it's actually being used, but you can always go back and tweak it. But yeah, if it's your first time playing around with 2 parameters on 1 keyform, and even blend shapes, just make sure that at every mixed point, it looks good. Make sure the transitions between everything look nice, and just make sure, you know, nothing looks jank. Alright, so next we're gonna do eyeball XY, which is pretty straightforward. So right clicking on eyeball X, we're just gonna edit the parameter. Click on blend shape, hit OK. Do the same thing for Y. And then I have a warp for my pupil and iris and shiny stuff here. If you don't, I would make a warp that encompasses like everything here on top of the whites of your eyes. And I'm gonna add 3 keyframes to eyeball X and Y. And then we're just gonna move everything. So for eyeball X at 1, we are looking to the right here. -1, we're looking to the left. And then for Y at 1, we are looking up. At -1, we are looking down. And then since these are blend shapes, the corners are basically already rigged in, so you don't need to do them manually. And then I'm gonna actually take all of my shiny stuff here, add keyforms to those for eyeball XY. And depending on the keyform, I'm actually gonna move these over a little bit. This is just to add a little bit more depth to the eye, especially for shines. You know, they're not gonna follow your iris up and down and everything. These shines are actually gonna follow, you know, the curve of your eye. You wanna be somewhat realistic with it. Of course, you probably have a more anime cartoony style to your model, so you don't have to be 100% realistic. Just whatever you think looks good to your eyes. I moved all of the little shinies the same way, but I'm gonna take each individual one and actually edit them a tiny bit just to make it a lot less static looking. And with that, you're basically done with your eyeball XY. But you can always add a little more depth to how the eye looks. If you know how eyes work, like in real life, with how the pupils are when you look left and right, you can implement that knowledge into your rigs to make them look a little nicer, a little fancier. For example, I'm going back to my warp that has everything here. I go to number 1 on my eyeball X. This is when we're looking to the right. And your eye is a ball. So when your eyes are looking to the left and right, it's going to follow the curvature of your eye. So you can make your pupil and iris and everything follow your eye. For example, here, I'm going to make sure I'm on smooth all for my bezier. And we can tweak this a little bit so that it looks like our eye is going on the curve of, our eye. So it looks a little less flat when you are looking around. Not only that, if you know anything about pupils, you might know that, the dark part right here, your pupil, the little black hole you have, when you look to the side, it's actually going to go in a little bit towards the center of your eye. Now, of course, this really depends on the art style of your eyes, because obviously, if you try to implement realistic eye stuff to more stylized eyes, it might look weird, it might not make sense. So honestly, all of this is up to your discretion, but these are just little tips that might help you make your eyes a little bit more interesting when you're looking around. And that's why it's nice to have a lot of your eye stuff separated. So I'm just gonna take a moment to actually go through all the little pieces of my pupil and iris stuff here and kind of edit all of my blend shapes here to look a little more spicy. Of course, everyone's model is going to look different and have different eye styles. I'm just giving you a little bit of an idea of what you can do with your eyes. But of course, do what looks best for your style of eyes. Alright, so here is my eyeball X. I did some tweaking with my little shine here and showing more of my outline and hiding it here at the other side. And when I look left and right for a little bit more, just for a little bit more depth. I might change it later because it might end up looking bad when I start actually trying it out, but And then here's my up and down, which is pretty basic. And, the corners when you add everything together. It's a little wonky, but you can always tweak it later. We're going for good enough. But yeah, hopefully that shows you guys how to use blend shapes to, really make your eyeball XY a little bit more special. Of course, you can always use regular parameters instead of blend shapes, especially if you need to do like something really precise for your eyes. And then for a little bit of a final touch for our eyeball XY, you're actually going to make the rest of the eye sort of move with our pupil. Of course, very optional, but it adds a little bit more oomph to your model, I think. So I'm gonna go to everything we rigged earlier. Basically, the whites, the lids, the lashes, and I'm gonna put that all under their own warp. I'm gonna call it eyelids maybe. And I'm gonna put keyforms on eyeball X and Y. So going to 1 on eyeball X. It's gonna take my brush tool here at eyeball X for +1. I'm gonna take the middle of my eye here and just shift it over a tiny bit. I have my weight down to about 10%, 9%, so it moves a tiny bit. That's my eye. The same thing for the other side. And then just adds a little bit of movement for your eyes when you're looking left and right. I am probably gonna tweak it a lot after the video, but just as a quick demonstration, I'm gonna do the same thing for eyeball Y. Bring this up a little bit, it's down a little bit. It kind of mimics like, you know, when you have your eyes closed and then you look around, like you can see your eyes like shifting under your eyelids. Does that make sense? But yeah, it just gives a little extra movement there. And then we are basically done with eyeball XY. Hopefully that helps you figure out some more fancy things you can do with your eyes maybe. And of course, you want to check your eye closed and open, testing out everything to see if it looks fine. Alright, and then for the last part of the tutorial, we're gonna go over doing a little bit of eye physics and then setting everything up in the physics menu. So we're gonna add a new parameter here, and we're gonna call this eye jiggle X. It's gonna go from -1 to 0 to +1, and we're gonna make that a blunt shape. I'm gonna duplicate that by right-clicking and hitting replicate parameters. And we're gonna right-click, edit it, and then make this into just eye jiggle Y. So if you watched my first tutorial, this is kind of the same thing, but just with blend shapes. So if we go to our iris here, I'm actually gonna grab everything on this layer that you see right here, and we're gonna add keyframes to eye jiggle X and eye jiggle Y. Since these are blend shapes, we don't have to worry too much about them all being on one warp. So for eye jiggle X at 1, I'm gonna hold down Alt and then take the side of the bounding box here. Expand that out a little bit. -1, we're gonna do the opposite way. We're gonna go inwards. And for Y, for +1, we're gonna go up. And for -1, we're gonna go in. So these are gonna be our parameters for our little eye squish. When we blink and everything, it's just gonna give a little jiggle to the eyes. And then of course, we can go into every little piece here. For example, I go to my pupil and add keyforms here. I can edit these even more. I can make this go the opposite way from how the rest of the eye is going. So add some layering, so it's all not just moving the same way, if that makes sense. And of course, you can do that for everything else here. I'm gonna add to my little shiny pupil thingy here and just go different directions. I would recommend making more parameters here for each thing you want to move when your eyes blink, just so that you can make each of them move differently. Since we're putting these on the same parameter, they're gonna be on the same pendulum, and therefore they're gonna move the same when our eyes blink. They're gonna start jiggling and end jiggling at the same rate, if that makes sense. But I made everything move a little differently, so it looks more layered. So we're gonna test it out in the physics menu, but before we do that, we're gonna go to modeling, parameter, and then go to settings for eye blinking and lip sync. Now you're gonna have 3 columns here. These are all your parameters. And then we have eye blinking and lip sync as little checkboxes. Find your eye opens, and you're gonna click those for eye blinking and then hit OK. That just makes it so that when we open up the physics menu, our model will blink automatically. Not a requirement, but it just makes things a little bit easier. So now we're gonna go to modeling, go down to physics settings, and that's gonna open up the physics menu. And if we zoom in our eye here, it is blinking automatically. And also left click and drag around your eye to see it all working together. Using the physics menu is a nice place to see if you need to tweak anything. But now we have to put in a physics group to actually make our eye jiggle here work. So go over to add right here next to group, and we're gonna name this eye jiggle XY. We're gonna leave these 2 blank and just hit OK, and that's gonna make us able to fill these parts in now. So we're gonna start with the input box here, and we're gonna hit add. So input is gonna be what we do IRL that gets tracked and goes to the model. So our input, of course, is gonna be eye open for our eye jiggle. So we're gonna select eye left and right open, hit OK, and you're gonna make sure these types are at position X. And we're gonna turn the effectiveness to 50 on each of these. Now we're gonna add a pendulum here under physics model settings. I'm just gonna put in the hair short pendulum, import that in, and then we can edit that accordingly if we need to. And then we can go to output settings right here, and we're gonna add our output, which is gonna be our jiggle. So our input is our eye open, So whenever we open / close our eyes, that's gonna affect our eye jiggle. And already you can see it working right now when our eyes blink. It's a little bit of an aggressive jiggle. You can always edit the settings down here to fix it. And then this right here is our pendulum. So whatever you edit here will change the pendulum. So right now I just changed the duration, which elongated our pendulum here. So it kind of lets our eye jiggle a little longer instead of the harsh, like super aggressive jiggle. So you can edit that to however you like. Shaking influence is just how much, you know, our eye shakes and everything. So I would go ahead and play with all these numbers to see what you like. You can also add another pendulum here and edit all of the numbers here as well. And then if you look on our output here, you can change the pendulum of one of these to the second pendulum, and that will make each thing move a little differently. Whenever you're adding physics to something, I really recommend putting at least 2 on everything that you're putting physics on. If you just put 1 parameter for physics on something, it might not look as smooth. Obviously depends on the look you're going for, but just a tip I like to give people who get really like staticky, awkward looking physics sometimes. And then of course you can always play around these numbers to see what you like. If you would like a copy of my parameters, I do have my parameter preset available at my coffee if you would like to download it. But if you're importing it into a model you're already working on, you will have to delete your physics / parameters, I think. So just a heads up. Also, one thing that I see a lot of people struggling with is their scale and output. You're gonna want to make sure your output is above 100. Sometimes it's okay being less, but you can always just increase, decrease your output here, or fix your scale manually. Make sure your output here is looking right. Sometimes if like your physics are a bit too crazy or they start rubber banding, your scale might be a little too big. And your scale does depend on your ranges. For example, for our eye jiggle X and Y, it goes from -1 to 1. Sometimes we do parameters that go from like -30 to +30, and you'll have to up the scale. Make sure your output looks okay. But yeah, for physics, it's just a bunch of looking at numbers and making sure everything looks right, especially for our dots here. When we blink, you can see that our eye jiggles are moving around. Make sure you get the full range of your rig whenever you're adding physics to something. You're gonna want to make sure like these red dots here are at least touching, you know, the ends here. If they're really weak and they're just around here, you only get a tiny bit of your rig. Sometimes that's what you want. So just a heads up for future physics stuff. You can always play around in the physics menu to see if everything looks okay. You can export your model and test it out in VTube Studio to see if you want to tweak anything from there. Of course, you can apply physics to a lot of other things to your eyes if you want. A lot of people like, you know, like wiggly eyes and stuff. I actually just quickly separate all my lashes as separate layers right here. So I'm just gonna rig these onto our eye jiggle X and Y's for now. I would recommend putting these on like a separate physics parameter, but I'm gonna add these keyforms on, and I'm gonna use the temporary path deformer tool here. Move the lash this way on the other side and move it the other way. And then for eye jiggle Y, I am going to move it a bit halfway through, like so. And now it'll wiggle like this, kind of like a hair strand. I'm gonna do that for the rest of the eyelashes. All right, so let's try this out in the physics menu. And now our lashes jiggle a little bit. I would also do this to the bottom lashes and the side lash right here. But that's basically the gist of it. Hopefully that gets you inspired to do some more physics for the rest of your eye. All right, now for the last actual step, we are going to copy, paste, and reflect our rigged eye to the other one. So I have my entire left eye on this one warp here. If you don't have it on one warp, you should. And then we're gonna right click on that warp to select child objects. And that's gonna select absolutely everything under that warp. And then I'm gonna hit down Ctrl C to copy that, and then Ctrl V to paste everything we just copied. So now we're gonna have an entire copy of our left eye. And since we have everything selected already, once we pasted it, we're gonna right click, hit reflect horizontally. Now if you have a lot of regular parameters, you might have like your eyeball X, Y, etc. here. It's not gonna show up blend shapes for reflecting parameters. We're gonna have to reflect those manually. But if you have anything that has an X here, I would reflect that over, and then we're gonna hit OK. And then our eye here should be perfectly on top of our old eye. Speaking of which, we are going to delete the layers that we did not rig. We're gonna do the same thing. This is our old eye here that we did not rig. If you move stuff here, you'll see that it doesn't move. We're gonna right click that, select child objects, and just hit delete. So now we only have these two eyes. Now, a benefit to copying and pasting your our eye art meshes to the other eye is that you'll actually save some room on your texture atlas. If you're copying and pasting any art mesh, it will count as one art mesh on the texture atlas. So if you open up your texture atlas, you're not going to see two sets of eyes. You're only going to see one if you deleted your old set of eyes. Just a heads up. Some people get confused about that. But since it's the same texture, you don't need like two different textures on the texture atlas, if that makes sense. And it also makes your file a little lighter. I'm also going to change the name of this one so I know which eye this is. Now we are going to fix up our newly reflected eye. So you'll see that my shines and pupils, they're reflected, of course, but I don't want them to be reflected. I'm going to select my shines, my pupils here, right click them to reflect them horizontally. I'm going to match my other eye over there, and then I can move each piece here individually to where I want them to be. And of course, you always want to test out your parameters here to make sure they're looking normal. Also, for your newly reflected eyes, you'll have to redo the glue. Luckily, it has the same mesh, so you don't have to remake your mesh for your glues and everything. But I am just gonna go and fix up my glues. Alright, my glues are nice and fixed up. Next, we're gonna fix our reflection issues. For example, our eyeball X is we're getting a little yeah. So an easy way I like to do is just take the top layer here, this warp that has our entire right eye in there. I'm gonna do the same thing and select all child objects. Then I'm gonna right click on our eyeball X, just one of the squares here, and go down to this drop down menu and hit reflect. And that's gonna fix that, easy peasy. Now for our eye jiggle, we don't want to reflect this because these are rigged a little differently than these. So if we reflect this, for example, it's gonna be a little lopsided. And then you'll see right here for our eyeball X, my shiny pupil here is a little off because it just is. So I'm gonna fix that. And then if we go to our physics settings, we should be able to see if everything's moving the same. And everything looks pretty alright. Test out our eye smile here. And everything looks pretty okay. I am obviously gonna tweak a lot of things later, but you know, we got most of it rigged, so it's all okay. All right, and then for the last touch, obviously we have everything rigged onto our left eye here, but we want to separate them so we can be able to wing. So again, selecting everything under my right eye here, we're going to right click on our eye left open and hit change. And this is gonna change all of the art meshes here that have this parameter rigged here. We're going to change all these keyforms and put them onto a different keyform. So obviously we're going to put these on eye right open, and voila, they are now on separate ones. So now they will blink and open for the right eye. And a lot of people that change their parameters will be like, I'm missing some parameters. I don't have all my dots when I change it over. Make sure you have the same numbers for each of these. Because obviously our number 2 here is gonna need a number 2 when we change it to a different parameter, because it will just change parameters but it won't change numbers. So just make sure you have the same ranges so that it changes perfectly the same. Same thing for if you change it to a parameter with way larger ranges, you're only gonna get parameters like towards the middle. So obviously if you have a range with -30 to +30 and you put in a -1 to +1 range in there, it's not going to encompass the entire parameter. So just a heads up for that one. Now you should be all set to go for your eyes. But yeah, thank you guys for watching the new advanced eye rigging tutorial. There's a lot more I wanted to go over, but honestly it's getting pretty long. But next tutorial we will be going over brows, but we will be going over them with more stuff. Advanced eyebrow rigging tutorial. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask below and I will try to answer them. Or you can go on our Discord and me or someone else can try to help you. And I'm hoping to get a lot of this model rigged this month. So hopefully more tutorials this month before my trip. But yeah, happy rigging. Good luck with anything you guys are working on. And hopefully you learned something today. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.